You're listening to Refracted World with Terry Geo. Episode 21. The First Gay Man. Do we have historical records of the first gay man? Well, no, because in the animal kingdom, homosexuality is prevalent in almost all animals. So the first gay man was likely one of the first humans to ever live, and unfortunately, there are no records dating back hundreds of thousands of years. When humanity began creating civilizations around 10,000 years ago, the written language was still in its infancy, and paper didn't exist, and likely wouldn't have survived this long anyway, even if it did. What we do have is wall art, and a lot of it. And the best known, and probably best preserved, is of course that of the ancient Egyptians. Now, for all of their incredible tomb paintings and carvings, Egyptians rarely talked about sex, sexuality, or sexual orientation. There is, though, one surviving tomb which could possibly be the first surviving record of a homosexual relationship. In 2500 BCE, Numhotep and Neakenum were married to women, and both had children, and they also seemed to share romantic love for each other. They were both buried together in the same mastaba. Listen to my podcast about Egyptians from a few weeks ago if you want to know what a mastaba was. And within their tomb paintings, they are depicted embracing lovingly, staring at each other, nose to nose. In life, they shared the title of overseer of the manicurists. They were basically nail salon owners for the palace. I mean, come on. Do we need any more evidence? Of course they were gay. But there are other scholars who argue that they were brothers, or even conjoined twins. Now, have these scholars actually been to the tomb and looked at the paintings? I'm guessing not, because these are not the poses of brothers. Also, the conjoined twins theory falls apart when you look at their other paintings in the tomb, as they are quite visibly standing apart, each with their own bodies. I feel this is simple homophobia once again raising its head and trying to erase queer history, but we are likely never to know for sure. I invite you all, though, to look at the paintings for yourself without prejudice and decide. In my view, all signs point to them being a loving gay couple, and if that is indeed the case, they were not only accepted, but revered, as their tomb paintings show. Perhaps back then, gay was okay, as long as you still sired children, to keep the population going, which, in today's terminology, would either make them bisexual or just doing their duty for the kingdom. As their paintings also depict their children and their wives standing behind them, it could have been the way many families lived, and this is the only recorded instance we have. Only kings and nobles got tombs. The majority of the population's life records have been unfortunately lost to time. But that's not to say only those with tombs can be recorded as gay. In 2011, a grave was unearthed by archaeologists in the Czech Republic, which seems to be the remains of either a gay or transgender man. If this is true, this goes back even further than the Egyptians, as the Copper Age skeleton is dated from 2800 to 2500 BCE. Funeral rites back then were taken very, very seriously, and a man was always buried facing west and along with items such as hammers, knives and weapons. But this man was buried facing east, with domestic jugs and an egg-shaped pot, which were usually reserved for women. Archaeologists know that people of this time were highly unlikely to make a mistake, and it's far more likely that the man was either homosexual or transgender. There are, of course, skeptics that refuse to believe this, but once again, the proof is there for you to decide yourself. What always ruffles my proverbial feathers is that, of course, there is room for doubt, especially when you're talking about a 5,000-year-old skeleton that's facing the wrong way and has pots instead of knives. But archaeologists have a lot of experience in these matters, much more than you and I, unless you're an archaeologist, of course. And therefore, we must allow knowledge to outweigh opinion. I'm not saying we shouldn't question anything, but we should also use common sense. Homosexuality isn't a new phenomenon, and it isn't something we choose to be. So it stands to reason that gay people will have lived and died in antiquity, and perhaps they weren't embarrassed by their communities, and they were not shunned or executed like so many others over the past 2,000 years since the invention of Christianity. Is invention the right word there? Creation, maybe. But whatever, gay people did exist, and for many civilizations, it was accepted. And you don't need to take my word for it. All we need to do is travel back to ancient Greece and read what one of the most famous philosophers of all time said. Plato. Born in 427 BCE, Plato was the father of modern philosophy. His student was Aristotle, and his teacher was Socrates, who is credited as being the founder of Western philosophy. There have been many texts depicting homosexual relationships between master and apprentice in these times, but I don't think that's the whole story. If you read Plato's Symposium, it casually and frequently talks about homosexual acts as everyday occurrences. Although back then there were no terms for heterosexual or homosexual, which adds to my conclusion that sex was fluid. There are plenty of texts from ancient Greece where same-sex relations are approved of and even celebrated. Who you were attracted to wasn't important, although in certain settings it could be deemed inappropriate. From reading many different texts, it seems the higher up the chain you were, the less likely you were to be open about your sexual pursuits. Some scholars suggest that ancient Greece could be prudish in certain circles. I guess it's like celebrities, world leaders, and the royal families now. They are so much in the public eye that anything that deviates from their everyday path is seen as scandalous. This prudishness does not seem to have extended to the general public, though, and certainly not to the philosophers and playwrights of the time. Plato is best known for two things now: Platonic love and Atlantis. Although he would never have used the actual term, as that may have been just a little too bit egotistical, Plato did describe what we now know as Platonic love in his Symposium. Seriously, you really should read it, it's great. But the Symposium is fiction intertwined with facts, characters, and gods of the time. He certainly wasn't self-referencing, as Plato praised the benefits of homosexuality in most of his early writings. In his later life, however, he seems to have changed his mind and proposed its prohibition. Aristotle dismissed Plato's possible change of heart in his work entitled Politics, where he said, "The Celts accorded it a special honour, while Cretans used it to regulate population." Ooh, sick burn there, Aristotle. But were those Plato's actual feelings on the matter? His former master, Socrates, was sentenced to death for impiety and corrupting the youth. Basically, he spoke out against religion, and the government worried he was influencing younger generations to move away from faith in favour of facts. Unfortunately, what little we do know about Socrates come from conflicting works, and scholars still can't agree on what is of historical relevance and what isn't. This conundrum has even been coined the Socratic problem. Socrates' trial lasted just one day, and he died in prison, refusing offers to help him escape, all because he wouldn't bow down to the gods. And we all know how ancient Greeks' religion is viewed today as fictitious stories and myths. Ooh, religion has a lot to answer for. So, did Plato become more conservative in later life, or did he publicly change his opinion to save himself from a fate similar to his former master? I guess we'll never know. Plato also wrote about Atlantis. I'm sure we all know that myth by now, but it is theorized that Plato wrote this because of what happened to Socrates, as a warning to the Greeks that all great empires eventually fall. Or it could be that it's all very real and Atlantis is waiting. That's a reference only Disney geeks will get. After the fall of Greece came the Roman Empire, and even more evidence of homosexuality, and here it was widely accepted and commonplace as it was in Greece, as long as it was between a master and a slave or a subordinate. The young male body remained a focus of male sexual attention, and there are accounts of consenting homosexual relationships that go all the way to the top. Emperor Hadrian, of Hadrian's Wall fame, is renowned for being a homosexual. His lover, Antinius, sadly died whilst on an official expedition to Egypt, which Rome now owned. See my previous episode. Yeah, Antinius fell into the River Nile, where he drowned. At least, that's the official statement made by Hadrian on his return to Rome. Gossip, though, surrounded the young man's death, and scholars believe he may have been murdered by the court, or by Hadrian himself, or, and this one's really painful to read, by voluntary castration, as an attempt to keep his youthful looks. And some say plastic surgery is bad. Any of those deaths sound awful, but the true nature of his death will likely never be known. And things were only going to get worse for homosexuals as Christianity was brewing in the background and sought to stamp out the entire community. But let's move elsewhere in the world where things were not so grim. In China, same-sex relationships have been recorded since records began. Historians believe many Chinese emperors had one or more sexual male partners, including a well-documented story of an emperor of the Han dynasty from 7 BCE, who had relations with his male concubine. These records of accepted homosexual relations work their way throughout all of China's rich history until homophobia was imported by, yes, you guessed it, the now Christian Westerners. Religion, it really loves to hate and segregate. A very similar story in Japan, who have documents of homosexual relations for over 1,000 years, and I'm sure many of us know about Thailand's third gender. I would really love to make a full episode on that, as the whole story is far more complex than I could ever put in a few paragraphs. South Asia, homosexuals are plenty throughout all of their history, starting with their records in 1200 BCE. In Papua New Guinea, same-sex relationships were an integral part of the culture, until, of course, the European missionaries arrived at their shores, waving a conflicting book of fairy tales. On the other side of the world, the Native Americans had respected social and ceremonial roles for homosexuals, bisexuals, and gender non-conforming people. Although these roles still exist today, with the new term of two-soul being adopted in the 1990s, the Native Americans are no longer the sole or even dominant community in America, ever since the British sailed over, once again waving that book around and decimating the population. I'm sure that's just what Jesus wanted. Homosexuals were also common in Latin America, with records from all the ancient civilizations, such as the Mayans and Aztecs. Oh, but the Spanish put a stop to that. After landing on the shores and seeing how people were enjoying same-sex relationships, they were appalled, and so started dealing out punishments to human beings, ranging from mere penalties to executing them, sometimes burning them alive, or others watching them being torn to pieces by dogs. Which finally brings us to Europe. Christianity reigned supreme here, and with it came the persecution and murder of anyone who wasn't heterosexual. By the Middle Ages, homosexuality was highly condemned, but this doesn't mean there weren't any homosexuals. Historians believe a number of leaders engaged in same-sex relations, including Edward II and Richard the Lionheart. The Renaissance, and particularly wealthy northern Italian cities such as Florence and Venice, brought with it the widespread practice of same-sex love. But always in the shadows, as known homosexuals were prosecuted and imprisoned. It is thought that beloved artists Michaelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci both had relations with men. Over in the UK, in 1533, the Buggery Act was made law, which punished homosexuals with death. By the 19th century, the British Empire was at its peak and introduced anti-homosexual laws across all its colonies in the world, of which there were many. At the end of that century, Oscar Wilde, one of Britain's most successful writers ever, was arrested and convicted of gross indecency. At his trial, lurid details were publicly claimed, which led to an even more increased scrutiny of homosexuals. After spending 2 years in prison, on release, Oscar moved to France and never returned to the UK. France became the first country in the world to decriminalise homosexual acts during the French Revolution in 1791, so Oscar was very safe there. Of course, like most Christian nations, homosexuals had not been well treated before that in France. In the 13th century, men had their sexual organs cut off or were burnt alive, and women were mutilated and executed. As an aside, I'd just like to talk about this. I have focused exclusively on gay men in this episode, as unfortunately there are very few records for gay women throughout antiquity, so for any lesbians listening, this is why, so I apologise. By the 1930s, although Germany had seen rather a vibrant gay scene, the Nazis put a stop to that. The LGBTQIA+ community were among the first groups of people to be imprisoned, tortured, and executed by the Nazis during the atrocities of the Holocaust. An estimated 100,000 men were arrested during this time, and 60,000 of them were murdered. Trans people too were rounded up by the Nazis and sent to concentration camps, but for trans people I would like to do its own episode and focus on the history of trans people. After the 2 world wars, technology had improved and carried on improving. Minorities were able to find others like them for the first time ever, and they could start coming together, and together they could make their voices heard. In 1967, England and Wales, and then later Scotland and Northern Ireland, decriminalised homosexuality, and the LGBT+ rights movement began. This didn't extend to the Commonwealth or former British colonies, though. Some did, of course, make the change, like Canada and Australia, and whereas others still cling to those archaic, evil, hate-filled laws that persecute people who were once revered by those same countries. It just sickens me that British and European missionaries would go to someone else's country, tell them their lifestyle is wrong, and then criminalise it. And yet, today, it's still criminalised. I don't understand it. Homosexuals were once respected and accepted for thousands of years in every single country, until Christianity. And it's just insane that it did so much damage and continues doing that damage today. And this brings us all the way up to modern day. Many of my previous episodes have talked about the LGBTQIA+ community, and I'm sure there will be many more to come. Being gay was once accepted by the entire world, and then it wasn't for 2,000 years. And we are now trying to rebuild what we once had in antiquity for the homosexual population, which just, I mean, if you think about it, it's just absolutely insane that we're having to do this. We're basically having to try and outdo all the damage that religion, well, Christianity did. And the thing is, they were trying to eradicate homosexuality, but they never did. I'm gay, and this is 2024. And there have been gay people throughout all of history, whether they've been oppressed or not, because no one chooses to be gay. You can't wipe something out that's just going to be born again in the next birth cycles. I mean, you look at the animal kingdom, all of the animal kingdom, or at least I think it's something like 97% of the animal kingdom, have been viewed to have homosexual relationships in them. So this is not something anyone chooses. This is not something you can't say that lions have been, turned to the dark side of being gay by watching television programs or reading propaganda on social media, because How could they? They are gay because they're gay, just like I am and everybody else. And if their plan was to wipe out homosexuality and it was a choice, it would have worked. I've given you a few descriptions of what happened to some gay people throughout history in different countries, but there are worse I could talk about that I don't want to upset you so much. Things that happen to gay people, and in some countries still do, are horrendous and horrific. And no one would choose to be gay under those circumstances. And yet, here we are, and we always have been. You can't get rid of us because we didn't choose this. It's important that I talk about this. It's important that I keep talking about this. It's important that many people keep talking about this so more people can learn about it. Because I cannot believe we live in a world where people still think being gay is a choice. When if you just stop for a second and think about it, if you know anything about history, in fact, if you are homophobic and you hate gay people and you actively are homophobic to them in person and you threaten their lives, etc., and let's say you live in a corner of America, I'm just choosing America at random, and it's very homophobic and, people are beaten up just for being gay. Do you think anyone would pick from a chart, I'm going to be gay? Okay, what sexuality shall I be? I'm going to be gay. I might get murdered. I might get beaten up. I might get, harassed my entire life, but it sounds fun. No, just think about it. But I suppose the people who are homophobic aren't clever enough to think about it. They just let their hate speak. And this is why we need more education. We need more voices talking about this. Again, I've given you a very, very slight snapshot of history and to try and explain that gay people have always been here. The first gay man is likely to be one of the first men to ever walk this earth. And we will be here till the very end. And nothing anyone will ever do will get rid of us, because you can't, because it's not a choice. Little impassioned there at the end, but I think you know how I feel. After listening to many of my episodes, I'm very passionate about the subject, and I'm hoping that if you're listening to this and you've learned something today, that you will tell someone else you know, or point them in the direction of my podcast and have them listen to it. And if you are here because someone's sent it to you, then hi, welcome. I talk about a lot of this stuff. And yeah, it's been interesting researching all of this. I have spent over a week researching. I even read the symposium. Well, I didn't read, actually. I listened to the audiobook. Don't lie, Terry. I listened to the audiobook of the symposium, and you can listen to them for free, actually. There's loads of different versions on YouTube. It's about 2.5 hours long, and it is worth listening to, but it's just so saddening. Is that a word? Saddening? How well we were doing as a species until Christianity, and how much that destroyed so many lives, and not just gay lives. I mean, not just the LGBTQIA plus community, but women's lives as well, and slaves, and so many human lives lost or tortured because of Christianity. Anyway, I shall stop there, because otherwise I'll go on a religion rant, and maybe I should make that into a whole episode for itself. But yeah, thank you for listening today. I'm going to talk about my store and subscription service next, so you don't have to listen if you don't want to. But the store I've designed loads of different stuff for the store. It's great. And if you do want to buy anything from there, please use the code podcast20, because it'll give you 20% off. And I've had people buy some t-shirts from there, so I know exactly how much I get back with that podcast 20 being used. I make 52 pence per t-shirt. That's how much I make with the so basically you are getting it for how much I get it for minus 52p. You can get a t-shirt for like under £20, just under £20, including postage. And I've got 4 of them. They're brilliant t-shirts. I'm wearing one now and I love them. So if you do want to, I can't even say support me, but if you want to buy one of my fantastic designs, then have a check of them out. The link is in the description. And check it out and make sure you use that code podcast20 if you do want to buy anything at all. And also, there are now possibly 3 episodes on my subscription service because I'm recording this 4 weeks in advance. So, there might be 3 episodes on there. If you do want to join my subscription service to get exclusive episodes, it's £2.99 a month, and you get episodes just for you. And if you don't want any of that, I'm fine with all that. I don't really make any money from it anyway. It's just nice to have these things for anyone that does want them. And I'm just really happy that you tune in every week. And I'm happy that I'm able to talk about different subjects and in an entertaining way. And, maybe you learn something, maybe you just enjoy listening to it. But whatever reason you're here, thank you. It means everything to me. And I hope you join me again next week. Until then, take care, everybody, and goodbye.